Hey guys, I'm Cal with North Beach Windsurfing, and today we're going to check out the new Starboard Evolution wind foils, and we're going to go over assembly and maintenance. So let's get right into it. So here's what we get, and I'm going to go ahead and unbox everything and get it out on the table for you to see all the parts and components you should have. Alright, so I've gone ahead and unboxed everything in my kit, and so we're just going to go over what you should have received with your foil kit. So here I've got my fuselage. On this foil, it's a 115. And I've got my mast, which is a 95, and this is the carbon one in this kit. And then I've got my front wing, and we've got the 1000, or the Millennium. 255 -2 tail wing. This is my shim kit, which we'll talk about when we assemble it. And then I've got a hardware kit, which we'll use when we assemble it. And here I've also got some paperwork, which we'll talk about in just 1 minute. And so here's the paperwork we were just talking about. And the first one is about the 2-in-1 foil box fitting guide. So what that is it's on the masthead here, and you can put it into a foil box as is, or you can cut along the line here to put it into a deep tuttle box. The next thing we have here is the warranty terms. If you didn't notice, Starboard does have a 1-year warranty on their foils. Anything from a manufacturing defect to any major breakage or something like that is typically covered. And then we have the assembly guide. And in the assembly guide, it's going to show us which length screws to use for the front wing, for the fuselage to mast joint, and for the tail wing. And it tells you which screws you need in the shim that you use. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and start assembling the lower part of the foil. I'm going to start with taking the shipping spacers out of the fuselage. These are pretty important because if they're not on, the end of the fuselage can get damaged in shipping or any kind of transport. I think it's a really good idea to hang on to these because if you fly with your gear and someone drops the bag out of an airplane cargo hold or something like that, these are going to save your day. And so I'm going to go ahead and take both out. And just keep them somewhere safe. And then these screws are part of your screw set as well. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started here and start screwing the tail wings into the fuselage. But wait, Tef Gel. Really important to use this on your screws when you assemble the foil, especially in a saltwater environment. It prevents stripping of the screws, and it most importantly prevents corrosion, which is the nemesis of anyone's foil. So if you get some of this, use it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take my front wing, slot it onto the fuselage, make sure everything's lining up right, and then I'm going to take my first screw. The first screw for hole A here is a 22mm screw, and it tells me that in the assembly guide with this little chart, and you can hold the screw up to it, and it measures the total length of the screw from the head to the tip of it, and it tells you how long it is. And so we're going to take this, and I'm going to put a little Tef Gel on. I don't need a whole lot. Just a little coating on the threads. And I'm going to screw it in, but I'm not going to go all the way down. I just want to get it basically seated, and I want to get all of the screws in before I really torque them down. Alright, so I've got all the screws in, and now I'm going to torque them down all the way. And you don't want to tighten one down really tight at first. You want to evenly go back and forth on them, so you don't pinch part of the wing down that hasn't seated all the way. And you don't have to go crazy. Once they stop, that's all you need. So that's the front wing, and now we're going to move on to the back. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and install the tail wing. Before we do that, we have to put a shim into the tail of the fuselage. Today I'm going to use the 0. It's a pretty good place to start on this specific model foil, which is the formula foil. And so I'm going to go ahead and just slot it on here. And then it does use a retainer screw. And I'm going to put extra Tef Gel on this one because usually you leave a shim in for a period of time and you don't disassemble it right after you sail. and that'll just prevent it from getting corroded and stuck in there. So there we go. And now we can go ahead and put the tail wing in to the saddle of the shim, and then we can select the screws that we need off the assembly guide for the length from what shim we have and which tail wing we have. And so putting the tail wing bolts in is the same as the front wing. I selected the size that I need, and then I'll just put one in at a time. No need to torque them all down at once. When you're done using the Tef Gel, make sure that you do cap it or close the container if you have a container of it, because it's really sticky. It gets on clothes, it can get in your tail wing, which isn't good for when you're foiling. The good news is just some denatured alcohol, which is basically camping fuel. You can get it at the hardware store or something like that. We'll take it off really quick with a rag. All right, so now the fuselage and wings are assembled, and we're gonna go ahead and just put them to the side and put the mast into the board. I'm gonna go ahead and throw these wing covers on, because that way I won't risk scratching up the wings or anything if I have to put them onto the ground. All right, so now I've got my board out, and we're gonna go ahead and put the mast into the board. So I'm gonna place it in the box and wiggle it in and push down pretty firmly. It does take quite a bit of force. It should not just drop in there. And when it gets to this point, I put my foot in the board lightly, not with my whole body weight, and it makes it easier to hold it. So now I've got it into the point where it's not really going in anymore and it's pretty much seated, and so we can put the screws into the mast from the board. All right, so now we're gonna put the screws into the foil mast from the board side. And if you bought a starboard board, it will come with screws. It'll come with a slightly longer one for the back, and you'll use the toothed foot strap washers with the teeth up as the washer for the screw. If you bought a different brand board, some of them come with screws, some don't, but I just wanted to note that the foil itself does not come with the screws. And so today, I'm just gonna use some of my own and go ahead and put them in. But I'm not gonna torque them down really, really tight just yet, just until they kind of stop turning with some light hand pressure. So now I'm gonna flip the board back upside down, and I'm gonna put the fuselage onto the mast. And the reason I'm doing that now is so I can use the fuselage to grab the mast and try to push it even further into the foil box, because you don't wanna go out without the mast fully seated all the way down. All right, so I've turned over the board, and now I'm gonna put the fuselage onto the mast. Make sure it's seated down, and I've looked at my assembly guide, and so I know which screw I need here. And I'm gonna go ahead and just install all 3 of the vertical facing screws first, because usually you can't get the sleeve screws in without torquing down the fuselage onto the mast a bit. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and thread in the screws into the barrel nuts from the opposing side. And I like to make these snug. And then I like to torque down the vertical screws all the way. If you torque down these screws all the way first, it might be hard to get one of the sleeve nuts in. But now that they're in, we can crank these down, and then we can actually snug up the sleeve nuts all the way. And so I'll put one Torx tool on the back and one on this side. And there we go. So now the fuselage is on the mast and the tail wings are on the fuselage, so we're almost ready to get in the water. In the step before, I didn't tighten down those screws into the foil mast all the way. And so now we're gonna readdress that. With the fuselage on, I can really crank on the mast, and if you see, there's still a little bit of give to it. And so I can get it a bit further into the box. And now I can turn over the board and torque the screws down all the way. So now I'm gonna torque down the mast screws all the way. And as you can see, I can get a few more threads in. And the new mast is going to seat into the board. And so when you first time on the water, you should actually come in after about 20 or 30 minutes and re-torque all the screws. Check the mast and the board, and the fuselage joint and the wings as well, because everything will seat a little bit more once it has the full body weight and sailing pressure on it. And so now I've re-torqued the screws, and I can double check, and I can pull on it really hard and the mast isn't moving, so I know it's seated all the way in the box. And now we're ready to go sailing. So that's it, and you're ready to get in the water. I just have a couple of helpful tips for the foil for maintenance and just general use that I wanted to share. The first one being the wing covers. These are really handy. They protect the wings from scratches, dings, and really importantly, the sun if you're going to leave the gear outside for any period of time or assembled. Which brings me on to the next tip. If you want to leave the wings assembled to the fuselage, you can do it, but you need to use more Tef Gel in the screws, and even put some on the threads where it goes into the carbon of the wing as well. You can do that, and you can leave them on for 2 weeks, even done it a month at a time without a problem. If you don't do it, the screws will be stuck in there after a week easily, so I really recommend it. All right guys, so that's it. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments or give us a call. Also, there's going to be a link in the description for our blog, and the blog post will cover everything in slightly more detail with pictures of each step and helpful, useful links to assembly guides and more.